USPAP 7-hour national update course 2022 through 2023, Chapter 7. Case studies 3, 4, and 5. Page 1. Chapter overview. Learning objectives for Chapter 7. Upon completion of this chapter, participants will be able to apply USPAP requirements and guidance in a case study about client conditions and assignment conditions. Apply USPAP requirements and guidance in a case study about confidentiality. Apply USPAP requirements and guidance in a case study about hypothetical conditions and acting as an appraiser. End of page. Page 2, Introduction. This chapter, like the last chapter, consists of case studies. As in the last chapter, you will need to search the USPAP publication to find potential solutions. There will be quizzes along the way. End of page.
Assignment conditions and changes to scope of work. Background. A client engages the appraiser for an appraisal assignment. The engagement letter outlines the specifics that help the appraiser understand the scope of work the client requires. The engagement letter is separated into the following two sections: administrative instructions, which include the delivery method and the delivery due date, and technical instructions, which include the following client-specific requirements. The appraiser is to personally inspect the subject property. The appraisal report is to include photos of the subject property. The engagement letter also states the following: the intended use of the appraisal is for private information. The appraiser read the engagement letter, concluded it was acceptable, and agreed to perform the assignment. Three things occurred by the time the report was delivered to the client. 1. The appraiser mailed the report to the client, who received it 2 days later than agreed. 2. The appraiser had not personally inspected the property. The appraiser had used an extraordinary assumption about the condition. 3. By not personally inspecting, the appraiser remained unaware of an obvious and serious defect. The client had known about the defect before ordering the appraisal and had assumed the appraiser would conclude a negative impact on value due to the defect.
That was page 3.
Study 3, question 1. The client had conditions regarding the assignment due date and payment arrangements. The client was unhappy that the appraiser delivered the report 2 days after the agreed upon date and accused the appraiser of violating USPAP. Specifically, the client stated that the appraiser failed to consider the due date, which is an assignment condition. The appraiser responded by informing the client that not every detail of an assignment is a USPAP issue. Some details are contractual or administrative in nature. Arrangements such as delivery dates, method of delivery, email, in person, etc., whom to contact, and payment terms are all contractual in nature and outside of what USPAP addresses. USPAP requirements apply to appraisers, not to clients. Is the appraiser correct in this assertion? Are assignment due dates contractual issues that are not assignment conditions? Please research the USPAP publication using the key phrases assignment condition and client condition. The FAQs might be particularly helpful in addressing this question.
That was page 4. Page 5, quiz. Number 1, the due date for an assignment is best described as. Ready, set, go. A, a USPAP requirement. B, a relevant characteristic. C, a client condition. Or D, an assignment condition. You said C, a client condition, and that was correct. So remember, number 1, the due date for an assignment is best described as, you said, a client condition, and that is correct. Number 2, if an appraiser delivers an appraisal report after the due date, is that a violation of USPAP? Ready, set, go. A, yes. B, no. I'm going to go no. You answered correctly. So remember, if an appraiser delivers an appraisal report after the due date, is that a violation of USPAP? You said no, and that was correct. Page 5. Question 1 answered. The definition of assignment conditions, that's highlighted, in USPAP is assumptions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, laws and regulations, jurisdictional exemptions, and other conditions that affect the scope of work. The assignment due date is none of these. The assignment due date does not affect the scope of work. It is a contractual issue or a client condition. FAQ 225 on page 281 of the USPAP publication specifically answers the question, is turnaround time an assignment condition? It states, assignment due dates are contractual obligations, but are not assignment conditions under USPAP. Turnaround times and similar items are business practice issues and are outside the scope of USPAP. Assignment conditions are defined in USPAP as assumptions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, laws and regulations, jurisdictional exemptions, and other conditions that affect the scope of work. However, an appraiser failing to comply with contractual obligations could potentially be subject to civil penalties. Additional guidance can be found in FAQ 146 on page 249 of the USPAP publication. End of page.
Study 3, question 2. The client found fault because the appraiser did not make a personal inspection of the subject property, even though the client had stated such an inspection was required. The appraiser responded that the requirement to personally inspect the subject property was an unacceptable assignment condition because the client's stated scope of work was a predetermined conclusion. The appraiser stated that the appraiser is required to determine the appropriate scope of work without undue influence from the client. The appraiser further stated that making an extraordinary assumption about the condition was acceptable since the client did not understand what intended use meant. The appraiser concluded that creating their own scope of work, independent of the client's requirements, was correct because not making a personal inspection was the expectation of parties who were regularly intended users for similar assignments. Is the appraiser correct in not making a personal inspection of the property despite the client's instructions to the contrary? Is the appraiser permitted to determine their own scope of work for the assignment without input from the client? Please research this in the USPAP publication using the key phrases assignment condition, predetermined, unacceptable assignment conditions, and input from the client.
That was page 6. Quiz. Number 1. Is the appraiser correct in disregarding the client's instructions and not making a personal inspection of the subject property? Ready, set, go. A, yes, because the client's instructions would have established an unacceptable scope of work. B, no, because the client may have some input into the scope of work and their instructions to inspect the property are an assignment condition. C, yes, because the appraiser has sole authority to establish the scope of work. Or D, no, because USPAP requires the appraiser make a personal inspection of the subject property in all real property appraisals. I'm going C. Damn it, they got me. Okay. The correct answer was B. No, because the client may have some input into the scope of work and their instructions to inspect the property are an assignment condition. So the question was, is the appraiser correct in disregarding the client's instructions and not making a personal inspection of the subject property? The correct answer was no, because the client may have some input into the scope of work and their instructions to inspect the property are an assignment condition. See the definition of assignment conditions in USPAP. See also Advisory Opinion 21 in the USPAP publication, Chapter 7, Case Study 3, Question 2. Page 7, Question 2 answered. The appraiser is not correct. USPAP establishes requirements for appraisers, not clients. Therefore, the phrase "the client's stated scope of work was a predetermined conclusion" is nonsensical based on USPAP. The definition of assignment conditions that's highlighted in USPAP is assumptions, extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions, laws and regulations, jurisdictional exemptions, and other conditions that affect the scope of work. The client's requirement to make a personal inspection of the subject property affects the scope of work and is therefore an assignment condition. Is this an unacceptable assignment condition? That's highlighted. The scope of work rule, page 14, lines 382 through 383 states, an appraiser must not allow assignment conditions to limit the scope of work to such a degree that the assignment results are not credible in the context of the intended use. A requirement to make a personal inspection of the subject property does not limit the scope of work. Advisory Opinion 19 in the USPAP publication is titled Unacceptable Assignment Conditions in Real Property Appraisal Assignments. On page 99, lines 47 through 53, this advisory opinion addresses what makes an assignment condition unacceptable. Specifically, an assignment condition is unacceptable when it precludes an appraiser's impartiality, because such a condition destroys the objectivity and independence required for the development and communication of credible results, limits the scope of work to such a degree that the assignment results are not credible given the intended use of the assignment, or limits the content of a report in a way that results in the report being misleading. The requirement to make a personal inspection of the subject property does not preclude an appraiser's impartiality, limit the scope of work, or limit the content of the report. According to the scope of work rule, page 13, lines 357 through 358, credible assignment results are measured in the context of the intended use. This is the primary reason why it is necessary for the appraiser to identify the intended use during the problem identification phase of the assignment. Under the scope of work acceptability in the scope of work rule, page 14, lines 390 through 391, it states, an appraiser must be prepared to support the decision to exclude any investigation, information, method, or technique that would appear relevant to the client, another intended user, or the appraiser's peers. It would be difficult for the appraiser to support this decision because they agreed with the client's required scope of work when they agreed to perform the assignment. Finally, FAQs 165 and 166 on page 258 in the USPAP publication provide additional guidance. The appraiser is responsible for determining and performing the scope of work, but the client may have input into the scope of work. A scope of work specified by the client is acceptable if it allows the appraiser to develop credible assignment results. End of page.
Study 3, question 3. A reviewer for the State Appraisal Enforcement Agency reviewed the appraisal report and work file. The reviewer came to several conclusions which are summarized below. The engagement letter stated the intended use was for private reasons. As such, the appraiser should have communicated with the client to clearly understand what this meant. The appraiser is responsible for identifying the intended use of the appraisal assignment results. The appraiser must identify the intended use before being able to determine an appropriate scope of work. In this instance, the scope of work the appraiser performed was not sufficient for credible assignment results. The appraiser chose not to inspect the property and thus did not observe the condition of the property. Instead, the appraiser elected to make an extraordinary assumption about the condition of the property. The use of this assumption was not acceptable because the appraiser had agreed to observe the condition of the property. The appraiser incorrectly modified the agreed upon scope of work without consulting the client. Is the reviewer correct? Should the appraiser have clarified the intended use with the client? Did the appraiser incorrectly modify the agreed upon scope of work? Please search through the USPAP publication using the following keywords or phrases: limit, assumption, modify, type, and extent. Searching for scope of work will likely yield too many results to be useful.
That was page 8. Quiz number 1. Is an appraiser required to clearly identify the intended use of an appraisal? And if so, why? Ready, set, go. A, no, it is not necessary to identify the intended use because the client already knows what they are going to use the appraisal for. B, yes, it is necessary to identify the intended use because the credibility of assignment results is judged in the context of intended use. C, no, it is not necessary to identify the intended use so that the appraiser will be able to charge a fee commensurate with the importance of the use. Or D, yes, it is necessary to identify the intended use because the appraiser needs to know the client's objectivities in order to help the client meet them. I'm going D. Damn you, it was B. All right. I knew it was yes, but there's two versions of yes. So the correct answer was B. Yes, it is necessary to identify the intended use because the credibility of assignment results is judged in the context of intended use. So remember the question. Number 1, is an appraiser required to clearly identify the intended use of an appraisal? And if so, why? The correct answer was B. Yes, it is necessary to identify the intended use because the credibility of assignment results is judged in the context of intended use. Page 9, question 3 answered. The reviewer for the state regulatory agency is correct. The appraiser failed to properly identify the intended use of the appraisal. Private information is not an acceptable intended use. The appraiser should have contacted the client and clarified the intended use. Had the appraiser done that, they would have been aware of what the client actually intended to do with the appraisal and would have known the importance of making a personal inspection of the property in this instance. Remember, the scope of work rule states on page 13, lines 357 through 358, the credibility of assignment results is always measured in the context of the intended use. Hence, it is critical for the appraiser to have a firm understanding of the intended use. The scope of work rule, page 14, lines 392 through 293, address the issue of assignment conditions, limiting the scope of work. It is important to note that the client's assignment condition, that's highlighted, did not limit the scope of work. The client requested that the appraiser make a personal inspection of the property, but the appraiser limited the scope of work and decided not to inspect the property and instead rely on an extraordinary assumption regarding condition. Extraordinary assumption, that's highlighted, is defined in USPAP, page 4, lines 111 through 112, as an assignment-specific assumption as of the effective date regarding uncertain information used in an analysis, which, if found to be false, could alter the appraiser's opinions and conclusions. The appraiser used uncertain information about the property's physical condition, and the intended use called for the appraiser to physically inspect the property to note its defect and consider that defect in the valuation. Finally, FAQ 166 on page 258 of the USPAP publication addresses the issue of the client specifying the scope of work. In this case, the scope of work specified by the client would have produced credible assignment results. So the appraiser should have complied with the client's request for the appraiser to make a personal inspection of the property. End of page. Page 10, case study number 4. Case study 4 is titled Agent of the Client and Confidential Information. That's highlighted. An appraiser completes an appraisal and delivers the written report to an agent. The party hired by the client to facilitate ordering and receiving an appraisal report. After delivery of the appraisal report, the agent calls the appraiser and states, "We made a mistake. We accidentally ordered the appraisal using the wrong client name. It was just an input error. Can you please simply change the client name and send the report back to us?" End of page.
Study 4, question 1. The agent for the client has asked the appraiser to change the client name and send a report back, and stated that the appraisal was originally ordered in the wrong client's name by mistake. The appraiser replied that the appraiser has identified the client by name and has reported the identity of the client in the report. This information is provided to the appraiser by communication with the client or an agent acting in the client's behalf. The appraiser would not have been able to proceed with the assignment without knowing the exact identity of the client. The appraiser went on to say that if the agent wishes to change the name of the client for whatever reason after the assignment is complete, this is, per USPAP, a new assignment. Is the appraiser correct in this statement? Does the appraiser need to treat this as a new assignment? Please search the USPAP publication using the key terms client, new assignment, and scratch.
That was page 11. Quiz number 1. An appraiser completes an appraisal for an agent of a client and transmits the report. The agent subsequently asks the appraiser to change the name of the client and retransmit the report. Because the agent provided the wrong client name to the appraiser, what should the appraiser do in accordance with USPAP? Ready, set, go. A, change the client's name in the report as requested. B, start over on the appraisal from scratch. C, send a letter to the agent that explains the error and assigns all client rights to the second client. Or D, consider the request as a new assignment. I'm going D. Boom! Finally got one good. You answered correctly. So remember, An appraiser completes an appraisal for an agent of a client and transmits the report. The agent subsequently asks the appraiser to change the name of the client and retransmit the report. Because the agent provided the wrong client name to the appraiser, what should the appraiser do in accordance with the USPAP? You said, consider the request a new assignment, and that was correct. Poll, if the appraiser decided to consider this request a new assignment, does that mean the appraiser must start over from scratch? A, yes, the appraiser must start over from scratch. B, no, the appraiser may use information from the prior assignment that is not confidential. C, the appraiser should not consider this a new assignment. This appraiser should simply change the client's name on the report. Or D, USPAP does not address this issue. I'm thinking no. Yeah, that's what 75.9% of us said. No, the appraiser may use information from the prior assignment that is not confidential. That's what I would say too. Page 12, question 1 answered. This is considered a new assignment. The appraiser completed the assignment for the identified client and delivered the report to the agent. The client's claim that the wrong client's name was included with the order may be legitimate, but it is moot. It is also possible that the agent's claim is simply an attempt to convince the appraiser to change the client's name on the report. The definition of client that's highlighted appears on page 4, lines 96 through 97 of USPAP. It is defined as the party or parties, for instance, individual, group, or entity, who engage an appraiser by employment or contract in a specific assignment, whether directly or through an agent. In the scope of work rule, page 13, lines 366 through 371, the assignment elements are listed. They include the client, the intended users. If any of these assignment elements are changed after the fact, a new assignment is created. In completing the new assignment, the appraiser does not have to start over from scratch. FAQ 150 on pages 251 through 252 of the USPAP publication addresses the issue of changing the effective date in an appraisal. This is also one of the assignment elements, so changing it would result in a new assignment. FAQ 150 states, such a request would need to be considered a new assignment, but that does not necessarily require starting from scratch. The advisory opinion goes on to state, as with any assignment, the appraiser might be able to use information and analyses developed from a previous assignment. In performing the new assignment for the second client, the appraiser must ensure that confidential information, if any, is handled properly. See also lines 54 through 57 of Advisory Opinion 27, titled Appraising the Same Property for a New Client. End of page.
Study 4, question 2. An appraiser completes an appraisal and delivers the written report to the client, a mortgage lender. A few days later, the interested buyer of the subject property calls to discuss the appraisal report with the appraiser. The buyer is not the client or an agent of the client. The appraiser informs the buyer that the buyer was not the client. Therefore, the appraiser cannot disclose any confidential information or any assignment results to the buyer. The appraiser tells the buyer that the appraiser may discuss facts stated in the appraisal report as long as those facts do not include disclosure of confidential information or assignment results. The client has not placed a confidentiality restriction on the assignment which means the mere fact that the appraiser completed an appraisal on the property is considered confidential information. The appraiser tells the buyer that if the buyer were an intended user, the appraiser could disclose either confidential information or assignment results to the buyer. Did the appraiser provide correct information to the buyer? May an appraiser discuss facts stated in the appraisal report with a party who is not an intended user? May an appraiser disclose confidential information or assignment results to intended users? Please search the USPAP publication for the answers to these questions. You may use the following suggested keywords or phrases: mere, fact, agent, identified in the report, and or disclose.
End of page. That was page 13. Quiz. Number 1. An appraiser completes an appraisal on a property for a mortgage lender as the client. The appraiser identifies the buyer of the property as an intended user. Is the appraiser permitted by USPAP to disclose confidential information or assignment results to the buyer? The appraiser completes an appraisal on a property for a mortgage lender as the client. The appraiser identifies the buyer of the property as an intended user. Can something assignment results to the buyer? Ready, set, go. A, yes, as long as the buyer is an intended user. B, no, unless the client provides authorization for the appraiser to do so. C, yes, because the fair lending laws require the appraiser to discuss their opinions and conclusions with the buyer. Or D, no, such a disclosure to the buyer would violate fair lending laws. I'm going to go... Damn it. That was the other one I was going with. Damn it, I didn't get it. I was confused because the correct answer was no, unless the client provides authorization for the appraiser to do so. See, but I thought it was an intended user. So I went with yes, as long as the buyer is an intended user. I guess I was wrong. So remember, no, unless the client provides authorization for the appraiser to do so. See the confidentiality section of the Ethics Rule, Chapter 7, Case Study 4, Question 2. Number 2, may the appraiser discuss facts in the appraisal report with a party who is not the appraiser's client or an intended user. Ready, set, go. A, no, an appraiser is not permitted to discuss an appraisal with anyone other than the client or intended user. B, yes, as long as they do not disclose confidential information or assignment results. C, no, unless the client or intended users give permission. Or D, yes, an appraiser may discuss whatever they want with whomever they want. I'm going to go... They got me again. Damn it. All right. The correct answer was B, yes, as long as they do not disclose confidential information or assignment results. See the confidentiality section of the Ethics Rule, Chapter 7, Case Study 4, Question 2. Poll results. An appraiser completes an appraisal for a client. No state enforcement agency or other illegal entity is involved. To whom may the appraiser disclose confidential information or assignment results? A, the client only. B, the client and intended users only. C, the client and parties authorized by the client only. Or D, any or all of the above parties. I think D. Ooh, this one was all over the place. So the majority of people went with C, 35.3, the client and parties authorized by the client. I went with D, any or all the above. Page 14, question 2 answered. The appraiser is only partially correct. The appraiser is correct that the buyer is not the client, and the appraiser may not disclose confidential information or assignment results to this party. Confidential information is defined in USPAP, page 4, lines 98 through 101, as information that is identified by the client as confidential. When providing it to an appraiser is not available from any other source, or information that is classified as confidential or private by applicable law or regulation. Assignment results is defined in USPAP page 3, lines 87 through 90 as an appraiser's opinions and conclusion, not limited to value. They were developed when performing an appraisal review, or valuation service other than appraisal or appraisal review. Physical characteristics are not assignment results. An appraiser may discuss factual information such as physical characteristics with virtually anyone. However, an appraiser may not disclose confidential information or assignment results to anyone not listed in the ethics rule. See below. The appraiser is incorrect in stating that if the buyer were an intended user, the appraiser would be able to disclose the confidential information or assignment results. Under the confidentiality section of the ethics rule, page 9, lines 248 through 254, it states, an appraiser must not disclose 1. Confidential information, or 2. Assignment results to anyone other than the client, party specifically authorized by the client, C. State appraiser regulatory agencies, third parties as may be authorized by due process of the law, a duly authorized professional review committee. Note that intended users are not listed, that's highlighted, in the ethics rule as a party to whom an appraiser may disclose confidential information or assignment results. Additional guidance may be found in FAQ 63 and on page 213, FAQ 57 on page 210, and FAQ 15 on page 194 of the USPAP publication. End of page.
Case Study 5, Scenario 1. This case study scenario is titled Hypothetical Conditions. An attorney ordered an appraisal on several properties, all of which had known alleged structural defects. The allegations were in the form of a high-profile lawsuit. The assignment was to appraise the properties without including the allegation of structural defects. The courts would later decide if the properties did or did not have structural defects. The appraiser was not an expert in structural defects. The appraiser completed the appraisals using, in each appraisal, the hypothetical condition that there were no alleged structural defects. Later, when the attorney submitted a copy of one of the appraisal reports to the court, opposing counsel accused the appraiser of solving the wrong appraisal problem. Opposing counsel stated the purpose of the lawsuit was to determine if there were or were not structural defects, and argued that the existence of structural defects was an uncertainty. Therefore, opposing counsel argued, the appraiser should have used an extraordinary assumption, not a hypothetical condition. The appraiser refuted the allegation that they had erred. The appraiser responded, the problem to be solved was to appraise the property without the alleged construction defects, and the allegation was a fact. I valued the properties as though no such allegations had been made. Is the appraiser correct in using a hypothetical condition instead of an extraordinary assumption? Was the appraiser's response correct with regard to USPAP? Please search the USPAP publication for requirements and guidance using the suggested key terms contrary and uncertain.
That was page 15. Quiz. Number 1. There were well-publicized allegations of construction defects involving the subject properties. Are these allegations considered to be facts that could affect the value of these properties? Ready, set, go. A, yes, allegations are facts, but they could not affect the value of the properties. B, no, USPAP does not specify. C, no, allegations are not facts. Or D, yes, well-publicized allegations of defects are facts that could affect value. I'm going to go D. You answered correctly. Good job. Number 2, an appraiser is valuing a property for which the zoning is indeterminate. The appraiser made several attempts to verify the zoning with the municipality but was unsuccessful. An adjacent property is zoned HC, which means highway commercial. The appraiser states in the report that the zoning could not be confirmed and it is believed to be HC and values the property as such. The report also states that this might have affected the value conclusion. This appraisal involves the use of ready, set, go. A, both an extraordinary assumption and a hypothetical condition. B, a hypothetical condition only. C, an extraordinary assumption only. Or D, an unethical contingency. Damn it. All right. I went with both an extraordinary assumption and hypothetical, but it was just an extraordinary assumption. See the definitions of extraordinary assumption, hypothetical condition, Chapter 7, Case Study 5, Scenario 1. Page 16, Scenario 1 answered. In the scenario, the appraiser was correct in how they handled this issue and how they responded to the attorney's accusations. In the definitions, USPAP defines both hypothetical condition and extraordinary assumption. Hypothetical condition is defined on page 4, lines 117 through 121 as hypothetical condition, a condition directly related to a specific assignment, which is contrary to what is known by the appraiser to exist on the effective date of the assignment results, but is used for the purpose of analysis. Comment. Hypothetical conditions are contrary to known facts and about physical, legal, or economic characteristics of the subject property, or about conditions external to the property, such as market conditions or trends, or about the integrity of data used in an analysis. Extraordinary assumption is defined on page 4, lines 111 through 115 as extraordinary assumption, an assignment-specific assumption as of the effective date regarding uncertain information used in an analysis, which, if found to be false, could alter the appraiser's opinions or conclusions. Comment. Uncertain information might include physical, legal, or economic characteristics of the subject property or conditions external to the property, such as market conditions or trends or the integrity of data used in an analysis. In this case, the issue of whether or not the subject property has a construction defect is uncertain. However, the well-publicized allegations, that's highlighted, of construction defects are a fact, that's highlighted. Even if the property does not have a construction defect, it still may suffer from a stigma, which is a loss in value related to public perception and the negative publicity surrounding the allegations of defects. If the appraiser had used an extraordinary assumption to assume there were no construction defects, the appraiser would still have been required to determine if there is a loss in value because of the well-publicized allegations of construction defects. In other words, the appraiser would have to consider the possibility that the property might be stigmatized due to the allegations, even if they are not true. If a hypothetical condition is used, the appraiser may value the property as though the allegations do not exist, and therefore would not have to consider the possible stigma created by the allegations. End of page. Fuck, another one.
Case Study 5, Scenario 2. This scenario is titled Acting as an Appraiser. A homeowner, who is also a professional appraiser, Appraiser 1, decided to sell their own home. The homeowner accepted a buyer's offer. The buyer then applied for a mortgage loan on the property. The lender knew the property owner was an appraiser, but concerned about a conflict of interest, hired a different appraiser to complete an appraisal on the property. The resulting appraisal report had numerous errors in it, which impacted the credibility of the assignment results, including the value conclusion. The buyer received a copy of the appraisal report from the lender and forwarded it to Appraiser 1. Using their company letterhead, Appraiser 1 wrote a letter to the buyer's lender identifying all the areas in the appraisal report that did not comply with USPAP and stated their opinion of the value of the property. The second appraiser accused Appraiser 1 of performing an appraisal review and an appraisal that were not completed in compliance with USPAP. Appraiser 1 replied that they are merely the homeowner, never claimed to be acting as an appraiser, and therefore had no obligation to comply with USPAP. Appraiser 1 claimed that since they are acting as a homeowner, they are not required to comply with USPAP and thus are free to say whatever they wish in whatever way and using whatever format they choose when they rendered an opinion of the other appraiser's work. Is Appraiser 1's explanation correct? Was Appraiser 1 acting as a homeowner and not an appraiser when they prepared their letter outlining the flaws in the other appraiser's work and setting forth a value opinion? Or did Appraiser 1 perform an assignment? Please search the USPAP publication to research and answer. Possible key search words include assignment, clear representation, acting in another role, misrepresent, and or agreement.
End of page. That was page 17. Quiz. Number 1. In this case study scenario, Appraiser 1 wrote a letter to the lender outlining the alleged deficiencies found in the other appraiser's report. Is this an appraisal review assignment? A, yes. B, USPAP is not clear on this. C, no. Is this an appraisal review assignment? Damn it. The correct answer was no. See the definition of assignment. There was no agreement between Appraiser 1 and a client. Therefore, there was no assignment. Chapter 7, Case Study 5, Scenario 2. Page 18, Scenario 2 answered. In the scenario, Appraiser 1 potentially misrepresented their role. There was no assignment in this situation. The definition of assignment that's highlighted in USPAP. Page 3, line 80 states a valuation service that is provided by an appraiser as a consequence. Between an appraiser and a client, there was no agreement and no client. Therefore, there was no assignment. However, Appraiser 1's actions may be considered a valuation service. That's highlighted. Page 5, lines 166 through 167, which is defined as a service pertaining to an aspect of property value, regardless of the type of service and whether it is performed by appraisers or by others. Although Appraiser 1 provided an opinion of the quality of the other appraiser's work, it was not an appraisal review because there was no assignment. The problem is that Appraiser 1 did not clearly indicate the role in which they were providing this letter. In fact, the letter was printed on Appraiser 1's company letterhead, which muddies the waters regarding Appraiser 1's role. The Ethics Rule, page 7, line 192, states that an appraiser must not misrepresent his or her role when providing valuation services that are outside of appraisal practice. By putting this letter on company letterhead, appraiser 1 potentially misrepresented their role. Advisory Opinion 21 also provides some guidance in this situation. On page 110 of the USPAP publication, lines 113 through 118 state, an individual who sometimes provides services as an appraiser but who is currently acting in another role must ensure that intended users are not misled as to the individual's role in providing that valuation service. This can be accomplished through such means as disclosure, notification, or careful distinction when providing the valuation service as to the individual's role. Additionally, clear representation of the valuation services to be rendered in the engagement communication, scope of work, description, or contract, as well as in written and oral correspondence with the client, should assist in ensuring intended users are not misled. See also the valuation services chart on page 112 of the USPAP publication. Appraiser 1 should have clearly indicated they were not acting as an appraiser when submitting this letter and should have printed the letter on personal stationery, not company letterhead. End of page. Chapter summary. In this chapter, this is page 19, we applied our research skills to solve 3 case studies, each with different scenarios. In case study 3, we addressed client conditions and assignment conditions. In case study 4, we examined an appraiser's confidentiality obligations and discussed what information is considered confidential. In case study 5, we addressed the difference between hypothetical conditions and extraordinary assumptions and examined the issue of acting as an appraiser. End of page. Course summary, page 20. This concludes the course materials. You will still need to complete the post-course assignment as well as the course evaluation form in order to receive credit for the course. Additionally, there may be other state-specific requirements you may need to complete. You will be directed to complete any and all such items by the course learning management system. We hope you came away from this course with a better understanding of how USPAP applies to real-life appraisal situations and how to research the USPAP publication to answer your USPAP questions. Thank you for attending.